This tiny island in the south of Thailand is known for very different reasons. Travellers will call it a backpacker's paradise, but the media will tell you not to visit. Koh Tao is a small island sitting around 60 kilometres off the country's southeast coast. It's long been a must-see destination for stunning beaches, scuba diving, and of course, the nightlife. But despite its idyllic setting, this place has also seen some darker days. In 2014, it made headlines around the world after the tragic murder of two British backpackers, leading the New York Times to christen it Death Island. But despite that label, tourists still came here in their hundreds of thousands, and I was one of them back in 2016 on my first ever trip to Southeast Asia. And I've got to say, I've only got really good memories of this place. But since then, things did change quite a lot. During the 2 years of closed borders, this island's tourist-reliant economy was pretty much destroyed. So when we came back to the south of Thailand in March of 2022, I was keen to see what it was like now. But first, we needed to get ourselves over there. We spent the previous few days on Koh Phangan, Koh Tao's equally famous neighbour. And I was up early that morning to start the day with a climb. Good morning and welcome back to another day in Thailand, where you join me above the shores of Thong Nai Pan on the island of Koh Phangan. And before we get started, just take a look at this view. It's absolutely amazing. Our plan for today is to jump on the ferry and head across to Koh Tao, which is another very popular island in this part of Thailand. And it's actually a place that I visited about 6 years ago on my first ever trip here, and it was a real highlight for me back then. But before we get into all of that, we need to get over to the other side of Koh Phangan, back to Thong Sala, where we're going to get the ferry across to Koh Tao. So, join us. Thong Nai Pan is right in the north of Koh Phangan, and the island's main port was an 18-kilometre drive away. Luckily for us, our hosts at the Havana Beach Resort were also heading into town that day, and they were kind enough to offer us a ride. The main route that connects Koh Phangan's north and south is a steep, winding mountain road that we tackled by bike a few days earlier, but the journey by car was much, much smoother, getting us into town in just 30 minutes. Koh Tao is 44 kilometres away from Koh Phangan, and historically it's a very well-trodden route, but I wasn't sure what to expect that morning. The ferry cost us 440 baht per person, and the journey itself takes just over an hour. And as you can see from the queues, there wasn't a lack of backpackers making the trip with us. The pandemic massively affected Thailand's islands over the previous 2 years, far more than any negative headlines before. In the popular tourist areas of Koh Samui and Phuket, we had already seen the devastating impact on previously lively places. And back in 2016, I remember Koh Tao having one of the very best atmospheres in Thailand. A lively but relaxed vibe, buzzing with beach bars and live music. We made this trip in March 2022, so Thailand had only really been open to tourists for a few months. And I wasn't really sure how much was left on this remote island only accessible by ferry. After we pulled into the main port, we got picked up by a guy from our hotel, and after we dropped off our bags in the room, there was only one place on our minds. Well, we have made it across the Koh Tao, and this is Sairee Beach. This is the busiest and most popular place to stay on the whole island, mainly thanks to the long beach promenade that runs all the way down the sand, and there's loads of cool spots here to check out. So, let's go and have a look around. Sairee Beach is the main tourist centre on the island, so as a result, the majority of its small population are based around this area. As well as being a very nice beach in its own right, you can also find pretty much everything here. That beach promenade runs almost the entire length of the sand, lined with lots of cool bars and cafes for all kinds of drinks. During the day, there's plenty of hipster coffee shops and healthy food cafes. You'll also find a selection of unique shops and restaurants, but you can't walk even a few meters without seeing the island's biggest draw. Sairee Beach is filled to the brim with scuba diving resorts and schools where you can either come and try it out for the first time or get completely qualified. And for those that prefer to stay above the water, there are plenty of boat trips you can take, something that we did the very next day. But what about that famous nightlife? Like I said, at this time in early 2022, Thailand was only just starting to recover from the pandemic, which had of course left a huge mark on an area like this that really depends on the tourist dollar. This place right behind me was my favourite beach bar the last time we were on Koh Tao. It was actually the first place I looked up when I knew we were coming back again. There used to be bean bags along the sand here, and it was just such a great spot to sit back with a cocktail and watch the sun go down. But as you can see now, it's not looking so good. On Google Maps it says it's temporarily closed, but the last review was over 6 months ago now, so I'm assuming the worst. Unfortunately, lots of places like this around Thailand have really struggled over the last 2 years, and it's very sad to see, especially when you remember what things were like before. It used to be so much busier here. So I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that maybe they can make another go of it further down the line, because it's not nice to see. Of course, there were areas of this town that had changed for the worst. Many of the most popular beach bars and party streets that we remembered from a few years back were now much quieter. But whilst the Fizz bar was no more, there were still plenty of nightlife options that were open for business and busy. You could find bars for cocktails, live music, relaxing beanbag retreats, and even fancy restaurants on the sand right next to those proper backpacker bars, complete with the classic fire shows and cheap drinks. But that night we tried to keep the buckets to a minimum, because the next day we had an early appointment with Koh Tao's trademark view. Good morning, it's currently 8:30 a.m. here on Sairee Beach, and it's time to get on that boat to take us around the island. And the first stop is going to be one of the most famous sites on Koh Tao. Let's do this. We booked our private boat in town the day before just by walking into one of the tour agencies, and we made sure to ask for an early start. Just before 9 a.m, when most backpackers were nursing their bucket-sized hangovers, we hit the open water, which we had pretty much to ourselves. The plan was to do a loop around the whole island over the course of about 4 hours, and just a short journey away from the Sairee Beach sand is a place that must be one of the most recognised and photographed spots in southern Thailand. A place known in English as the Twin Islands. So we've made it over to Koh Nang Yuan, aka the Twin Islands. And to see this place from the best angle, we need to get up to that viewpoint to look down onto that sandbar. And because we're here at such a good time, it's actually only just opening now, so we should have most of this place to ourselves. So let's get up there. There is an entrance fee of 100 baht that goes towards the upkeep of the island, and the viewpoint in question was on the island across the water, meaning we had to walk right across that skinny stretch of sand. The tide is in, so the sandbar is still covered in water, and it's amazing clear and blue. So, to get up to the viewpoint, you just need to follow this boardwalk all the way around to the back of the island, and then it's a steep, rocky jungle trek up to the top. And last time I remember the view being absolutely amazing, so I'm looking forward to seeing it again. Because we've got here so early, it is very quiet, apart from a few people that were obviously staying on the island here. 6 years ago when we were here, I remember we also got here quite early, but then at about 9:30, 10 o'clock, all of the big tour boats started to appear. Now, I don't know if that's still the case these days, but I suppose we'll see. But at the moment, it looks like we've got this whole trek to ourselves. There were a few more actual steps than I remembered compared to a few years back, so it was pretty easy to take on the climb in flip-flops, apart from the short, rocky scramble near the top. But after that, you can just stand up and take in the scenery. Well, we have made it to the top and look at this view. This is absolutely incredible. It's like a postcard. It's actually a pretty short climb up concrete steps and it's covered by trees as well, so it's nice and cool. And when you get up here, it's so worth it. It's known as the Twin Islands, but it's actually 3 different islands here connected by 2 sandbars. It's really cool. And that water looks so blue from up here. And I'm actually feeling quite hot and sweaty now, so it's time to get down and have a swim. So we've now come over to this second sandbar, and from what I remember of this place before is that this whole strip was just covered in sunbeds, and about 5 minutes after we sat down, huge boats started to turn up and hundreds of tourists started to get off. But now, as you can see, it is completely deserted and there's only a handful of beds as well. So this place has definitely changed, but it's still extremely beautiful. After spending about half an hour enjoying the peaceful beach, we headed towards our next stop, where we could finally try out one of Koh Tao's most popular activities beneath the surface of the water. Well, we are now at our second stop, which is Tanote Bay. And along the seafront here, there's lots of resorts and restaurants, but we've come here for the snorkelling. But unfortunately, I'm a bit of an idiot and I left my GoPro back on Koh Samui, so I can't show you what it's like in the water. But I've already been inside and I can say it is really good. The water right on the shoreline isn't that clean, but once you swim out a bit further towards those rocks, it is crystal clear and there's so many different types of fish in there. I don't know any of their names, but they're all sorts of shapes and sizes, different colours. It's really good. And because there's so many restaurants along the front here, I think it's a great place to stop and have some lunch, and I can definitely show you that. We stopped into this really cool wooden shack and sat on the deck upstairs, where I had a delicious lab moo. We then continued our journey around the island to do some more snorkeling in the scarily named Shark Bay. We actually got a great view of this part of the island the next day after climbing up to the Suwan Viewpoint. It was a short but tricky climb complete with ropes, made worthwhile by that final view over the mirrored bays. Again, I didn't have my GoPro with me for the snorkeling, so this is the only view you'll get of this part of the tour. But don't worry, we didn't see any sharks anyway, so you didn't miss much. Our last stop of the day was at Nuan Beach, a tiny secluded spot which still had some accommodation and restaurants. It was easily one of the more peaceful spots that we found on Koh Tao itself, which was a really nice place to unwind when the weather was taking a little bit of a turn for the worst. And just before the rain hit, we headed back towards the hustle and bustle of Sairee Beach, where it all cleared up for the sunset. Koh Tao had changed since our first visit, but almost everything that attracted people to this island was still there to see. And since our visit in March 2022, I have no doubt that this island is continuing to return to normal. Next time, we head to one of southern Thailand's more obscure islands, a place where the main inhabitants are swine.